It's time once again for the Living Proof podcast with LarryC. Reach out, get the help you need. Ain't no shame in asking for help. We all in this together. Help each other, help each other, help each other, help each other.
Well, all right. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Living Proof podcast. I am your host, LarryC, and joining me today, I have a pretty amazing lady. She is a local native who grew up around the Tybee and Wilmington Island area. She is an advocate and community organizer who has dedicated her personal platform and fundraising to addiction awareness and grief support because recently addiction became very personal for her. Her efforts bridged her professional work, personal history in coastal Georgia, and her current leadership with the Georgia Into Light project, which I myself just recently learned about. And I think it's just amazing. We'll definitely cover that first. But Kristi, let me start by saying thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come on here and share some things that are dear to your heart and very personal for you. I appreciate your willingness, and the work that you're doing right now is just amazing. Welcome to the Living Proof podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this cause. I always say, I'm happy to get in front of any ear that'll listen when it comes to this. So I just appreciate the chance.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for being here. I see that you're a very busy person these days. And as I mentioned a second ago, with this Into Light project, I hate to jump right in, but I'm a little anxious to hear about this Into Light project. Can you tell us a little bit of the history lesson on what it is?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Into Light Project is a national nonprofit organization, and its main goal is ending the stigma surrounding addiction. And it does that through telling the stories and through art, but telling the stories of people who have lost their lives to drug-related deaths, overdose deaths. And so it started in North Carolina. A lady there lost her son to a drug overdose and was introduced to an artist who they kind of collaborated, I guess, and this sort of was born out of her idea that if we could get like 30 portraits drawn by professional artists of 30 people from each state around the country who've lost their lives to addiction, get the families involved or the loved ones involved to tell the narratives, tell the story of who that person really was, because there's so much more, as you know, than their addiction. That's just a piece of the story of their life. But these are real people with real stories and real personalities and real passions and real desires. And oftentimes that gets overshadowed with someone struggling with addiction. So the idea is let's humanize the people who have lost their lives and have these art exhibits that can travel around the state. And people can come view the art exhibits wherever they're opening, wherever they're located, wherever they're being hosted, but then can also get into conversation. And we really aim to continue that conversation around the state, and then hope that the groups that we're speaking in front of and showing those portraits, those groups then take it into their smaller circles, because if we can talk about these people, put faces with the people, and then show that they're people struggling with addiction, and even people who lose their lives to addiction are just like everybody else. Yeah. And humanize it in that way, that a way that people can relate to, then it'll help, I think, in the stigma, so that the next time the topic of addiction comes up, maybe they're a little more educated and a little bit more open-minded and open-hearted, which I think will ultimately help with the struggles of addiction itself.
Right. And do you find when you talk to people, or when you hear people talking, it's like they have tunnel vision, like, oh, that guy's an addict or this or that. And it's like, all they see is just that. When, like you said, there's other parts and other parts of these people's lives that they had that was never told or never shared, and like very important, but
Yeah,
people just focus on the
absolutely.
drugs.
I think that's the thing is what I've learned is, people really can't or have a hard time or maybe just don't have the occasion to have compassion for something that they can't see, that they haven't experienced in their own lives, or just that they can't open their eyes to and really look inside. And so, I dealt with that too. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes in terms of my relationship with my boyfriend, my loved one. And so, I mean, I didn't know what to expect when I met him. I didn't, I had an idea in my head, just pretty much gleaned from society's view and movies and television of what someone who's addicted to drugs must act like, how they carry themselves. And when I met him, I was really taken aback because he didn't, match that stereotype. Um, so I get it. I get where a lot of people are coming from. I do think most people are starting from a good place, but they've been misguided, and so whether they're open-hearted and misguided, or closed-minded and judgmental, it doesn't matter to me. But yes, I do find that starting off like that, yeah, I mean, that's where a lot of people arrive at it if they haven't personally experienced addiction in their lives. And so I reached out to the CEO and COO of this nonprofit. I realized that Georgia was not one of the states participating at that time, and told them that I would like to be considered to be the ambassador for Georgia, which really just is, thank you, bringing it into Georgia, and then kind of spreading the word, getting the exhibition going. And so the art exhibit will open in Carrollton in November this year, at an art gallery there. But even from now until then, and then after that, like forever, this thing's available to be purchased to keep at different hospitals and schools and churches and things like that, but also just for temporary exhibits. If you want me to come speak at your organization, then I can travel with anywhere from 1 to 30 of those portraits and those stories, and we can kind of tailor the conversation to the audience, to the age of the audience, to the cause that the audience is most interested in. So it's nice that, it's got the flexibility like that. But yeah, we've had a great reception for it in Georgia. The 30 submissions have already been filled up, and they filled up very fast. So it's a sad thing, but hopefully some good will come out of sad situations.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a good thing that all 30 filled up, but yet it's still, I was just talking to somebody earlier. They're like, I told them I recorded a podcast yesterday. I recorded one. I've got like a couple ready that are waiting to be published. And he's like, wow, man, that's really popping off. I was like, well, I mean, there is no shortage of addicts and alcoholics. I mean, there never will be, sad to say. But, yeah, that's amazing. And was that, if it's going to be in the state of Georgia, and if the person is to be put into that, is that somebody that lives in Georgia? Is it strictly go state by state?
Yes, state by state. So mostly you see that the 30 submissions all are people who did live in Georgia at the time they passed away. It is possible to submit your loved one if you live in Georgia, and maybe they actually were from Georgia but passed away in New Jersey, but
Right.
they've got a tie to that state, and usually it is a resident of that state.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's it's an amazing project. I mean, I love it. It seems like I go back and I'm always looking at something since I heard about it from when Marie posted. Hi, Marie, BB.
Hey, Marie.
And I've been checking it out, but that is just it's an awesome, that's an awesome project. You may or you may not get it a lot, but thank you for your work, your time and effort that you've put in this, and that you're gonna put in it. It's like you're kind of like, you're one of the voices now of those silenced by addiction. And that's really an honor. I mean, that's like a major thing. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's the most important thing to me at this point in my life, for sure.
Definitely. All right. Well, we discussed the project and what it's about. Would you like to take us exactly to why it's so important to you? Tell us.
Yeah, thank you. So my boyfriend, Zeb, lost his life to addiction, to a drug overdose in February of 2025. He was 38 years old, and he had struggled with addiction since he was a teenager. Being introduced to drugs at such a young age, and then, as often is the case, one substance leads to another. And so opiates were his drug of choice. That wound up kind of opening up a whole scary big world that he then lived inside of in one way, shape, or form for the rest of his life. So from the age of around 19 or 20 years old, when he first was introduced to them, he immediately became addicted to them, and had a lot of serious consequences that he suffered from, in his 20s and his 30s, because of that addiction. Comes from a family who, did not suffer from addiction or struggle with addiction outwardly, at least, wasn't familiar with it in the home or anything like that. And so everybody, in his family was unfamiliar, and pretty quickly he started facing those consequences. He was arrested and served time multiple times throughout his struggle, and but never wanted to be, or I would say, I guess there were probably, according to him, very limited windows during all those years that he just like gave into, this is just who I am. This is just the lifestyle that I'm going to lead. It was never like that. It's just addiction took over. And so he was kind of fighting this constant battle. But when you're using drugs and drugs are illegal and you're caught using them and you're arrested, it's just such a cycle over and over of use, sobriety through incarceration, the stigma attached to being incarcerated, the stigma then when you get out attached to having been incarcerated, how that affects your ability to, succeed professionally.
Work.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's this perpetuating like shame cycle.
Right.
And he was right in the middle of it for so long. And so when I met Zeb, he had achieved long-term sobriety. He had been sober for 2 years when we met, and had finished a year in a sober living, or was finishing up a year in a sober living.
Wow.
That had been really, really good for him. And so I knew of Zeb, and I knew of his struggles because my best friend is his sister, and we had been best friends for like 15 to 20 years at the time that he and I met. Yeah. And so I always knew she had this brother who struggled with drug addiction, and we had never gotten the occasion to meet. It was actually something that we used to joke about because I had always met and known and hung out with her other brother. And so I used to call Zeb her other brother. I had not met him, and I'd say, when are you going to let me meet your other brother? And she would kind of go, oh, and I'd get updates about him just here and there, sporadically. But those updates were usually he was either like in a rehab facility, in institutionalized, in jail or prison, and or on the streets, in active addiction. And so those were stresses that she would relate to me, that the family faced a lot. And but one day that changed. And so fast forward, the stars aligned, God allowed us to meet. And like I said earlier, I had never thought about what Zeb would be like. But I just had in my head kind of what I assumed a person who did drugs all the time would be like. And I just always assumed that's what they're just wanting to do. They just love drugs. It makes them feel good. And so that's just how they're choosing to live their life. I never really thought one way or another about it, but that's just because I didn't have the occasion to think about it much, period, And so we got thrown together in such a weird circumstance that it actually, her dad had a medical issue, an emergency medical issue. And so Zeb and I wound up in a car together alone for the first time, meeting like a two-hour car ride. And I don't know, it was crazy because like I remember him shaking my hand, introducing himself. We got in the car, and from the first second, there was never a bit of awkwardness or sort of this like apprehension about either of us and our lifestyles or anything. And I know that was helped by the fact that I was close with his family. I was best friends with his sister. We were almost like sisters at that point, so it was definitely a comfort like that. But just that I just felt like I was meeting someone who'd lived the same kind of life and background that I'd had. And that was crazy to me. I used to joke and sort of, he would make me do the impression of him that I thought I would be meeting if anyone had ever asked me, like, what do you think he'll be like? And, he was not like that at all. It was just, it sounds, so naive or ignorant of me now in my own ears to even be saying that those were my expectations, just because now knowing him the way that I do, we went right into deep conversation from the beginning. He was so easy to talk to. And so we started talking about our dreams in life, what we want to do, what we care about, how we feel about certain causes or certain issues in the world, what keeps us awake at night, what's that passion, what's that drive, what our workout routines are like, and how we, feel about fitness, what our favorite books are. I remember he asked me, what's your favorite book? Because we both said we love to read. And I was like a Nicholas Sparks book, probably. And I'm like, what's your favorite book? And he's like, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And I had barely heard of it. But it let me know, it spoke to a certain intelligence level that's your favorite book, regardless of how you feel about that book. And I happen to love it, but it's a complex book. And so I kept hearing things in that conversation that were just like, making my head spin in the car ride, but like in the best way. Another thing that really stood out and always did about him is that Zeb really owned his past. He owned his story. He was very self-assured. He knew the things he had done wrong, was willing to talk about them, was willing to be the one to initiate the conversation, fully own those things. And he was so solid in his recovery at that time. And he was really, and he would tell you, he was disgusted by the idea of drug use. He couldn't believe that he had ever done it, that he'd ever been in that lifestyle. At that point, he was really like repulsed by people who were still in that lifestyle. He didn't see how they could still be doing it. And I don't know. So he was just confident. He was honest, and just owned the BS of his past, and was ready to tell you everything that he'd done. But, more importantly for us is like, but what are you going to do? And who are you now? And what do you think about now? What do you care about now? And so that was our connection. Our connection was fun. He was funny, but it was very deep, very instant. And I dropped him off that night, and I texted my best friend Carrie, and his sister, and I just said, "Oh my gosh, I love your brother." And I didn't realize it, but he had, or I think I called her actually, and I didn't realize it, but he had called her too, and said, "I'm in love with your friend Kristi." So I think he said, "I'm going to marry her." And we only found out all of that after the fact, but it was kind of just from that point on that we were in each other's lives. I didn't know anything about what the future held at that point. I was involved in my own life situations, and I just knew that something kept drawing me back to him. Like, I didn't know what it meant, but I just knew I want to be around him. I just want to be around him more. And pretty much any chance that I could get to have that happen, I wanted it. And, fortunately for me, he felt the same. So, he had, I reached out to him, I think the first time I reached out, and, said, "Well, I was wondering if you would want to do this." And he's like, "Yes," before I could even get it out of my, mouth. It was nothing big. It was like, "Ride with me to such and such, or have coffee with me here," and then I said, "Well, do you want me to meet you here or there?" And his response was then and always after that, "Whatever equals more time with you." And that's exactly how we would put it, "Whatever equals more time with you." And so we were lucky that we felt the same. And so our relationship progressed, and it progressed quickly. We just connected in a way that you feel like you have always known that person, and that it really is your person. I'd been in relationships before. I wasn't a stranger to relationships and romance, and all of that, but this was just different in a way that I couldn't explain. In a way
This
I
was
I
your
didn't.
person.
Yeah, yeah. And so yes, so we spent all of our time together, and we talked all the time. All hours of the night we could find ourselves staying awake unintentionally, just lost in whatever conversation.
You
Um,
guys are like a couple of teenagers over there.
Well, it's like it could be about something super super deep and very important, or it could be about like nothing at all. But I don't know, we just really vibed or played off of each other in those conversations of, what do you think about this, or like, how do you feel about that? And then we would kind of, it was either those types of conversations or business ideas, because we both really are business minded. And so we would always be kind of growing these business ideas together. Zeb in incarceration had read like every book he could get his hands on. He said that he told himself, if I'm going to be in here, it's not going to be wasted time. I'm going to try to grow myself as much as possible while I'm in here. And so I think, there are maximum numbers of books you can have at one time. And his mom would constantly like max that out for him. And he would read them and say, okay, more, more, more. And so he had really educated himself after high school. And, I have to say, I have a professional degree. I'm a lawyer in my day job. And so I've gone through a lot of levels of education. And that was another thing that really, really surprised me, is that Zeb is the most intelligent person that I've ever met to this day. And to know that he could carry conversations about topics that I had never even heard of, or I'd heard of, but I knew nothing about, that I felt like were, completely over my head. And to know that he had taught himself all of that, or most of all of that. He was just so well written, well spoken. And I don't know, I was just so in shock. Like, how have you learned all of this stuff? And he was very, very into the stock markets and finances and how all of that works. And I don't know, coming from someone like me who felt like I had been taught it all through school, and then kind of feeling like this guy like took the short route to all of it and really knows so much more about so much of this than I or any of my friends and colleagues do, was just cool. You know, it's something I respected about him too. But yeah, so we spent all of our time together. And then Zeb had told me after getting out of the sober living, like I couldn't picture what he was like in addiction. And so I would ask, like, I just don't understand. I've never been around anyone who's, on heroin or who's high. Like I had only been around someone who's high on marijuana, and so it was like, what would you be like that? I can't picture it. And it really truly was like unimaginable in my brain, because this person, you're hanging out with them, you know who they are and how they are as a real person. And then, but he's telling you like, I can't really explain it, but it's just like, you would know. I'm like, I can't picture that, and I kind of thought like, this is just something that will never happen. He hated drugs so much. He was so solid in recovery. He led so many other people who were in recovery themselves. He'd get phone calls all the time with people struggling, and they reached out to him because, they said, I need a speech from you. Like, I need you're always solid. You're always strong. Like, I need you to talk to me. And just, I would hear him counsel these people through these struggles. And the stuff that he said just sounded like he had it all together, And I think that's where, if you asked him, he probably went wrong, is believing that he had it all together at a certain point. He said he'd never had cravings through that 2-year period of time. He'd never actually dealt with them. And I think, according to him, that was a little bit odd or different from most people's experience. And so he didn't know what that would even be like. And he just thought, I'm never going to have cravings because I never have so far. And getting out on his own, trying to live an independent life like that, I think was a shock to his system. And that drug addiction had laid there in hiding and sleeping, but not gone. And so the minute that he kind of let his wall down, like, it came on him, and he had not had those times to practice with cravings and, what to do, what that would really be like. It's different to learn about what you should do if you have a craving, and I think not having cravings, and then all of a sudden it comes on you and you're faced with it, So he relapsed, and he was honest. He picked up the phone, he called his employer, he called his mom, and he called me. And I happened to be out of town at the time. And he said, I just have to tell you something I used. And I had never even heard that phrase at the time. So like, I remember just kind of being jarred, like, what? You used drugs? I can't believe it. You are so against it, And so he checked himself into a detox right away before I ever even got back into town, and came back from that. And from that point forward was really an on and off struggle with maintaining sobriety. So he did, and he was able to, but he was always struggling with keeping it all together, staying sober. If he would slip because of the nature of addiction to opioids, then it was kind of one leads to the second time to the, okay, I need a detox because this isn't just going to go away. And whether he detoxed at home or went to a detox facility, went into an inpatient treatment, an outpatient program, and really anything in between. If he was either clean and living sober, or he had used again and was doing one of those things, or coming up with some different way that, okay, it might work this time to get me to recovery. And so our relationship was about 3.5 years. And that was a lot of it, but I don't mean a lot of it in terms of it didn't dominate our relationship, but it was just never not present. So it was something that we both had to navigate. I had no experience with addiction, like I said. And so once he relapsed, I realized I needed to educate myself. And so I love learning. I'm just a person who, tell me there's a topic and I want to read everything I can about it. And so that was a good thing for me. I just started trying to absorb as much knowledge that I could find, whether it was online articles, interviews, videos. But I did,
Anything and everything.
yeah. But knee-jerk reaction was definitely, what is wrong with is our relationship not good enough? It seems like everything's kind of clicking along in your life better than it ever has. And that's what stunned him. He's like, I'm happier than I've ever been in my life by like tenfold, So I'm bothered because I don't really have a reason now, an explanation. There's nothing that I can point to that should have precipitated this. And I think that was harder for him than previously, when it's like you're living a shitty life. And so shitty things are happening to you. And that makes you want to go out and use or just give up the fight. Now it was like everything is, what he said is, I have everything I could ever have wanted. I'm in love with you and I have a good job that I love, and so I've got a good relationship with my family now. And, he has a daughter. My friend Carrie adopted his daughter when she was born. And because, he was not able to keep her. And so he was able to have the relationship with his daughter that was like so crucially important to him. So everything seemed good. And that's what bothered him the most, I think, in trying to unpack it all. But he is the one who suggested that he said, would you talk to my mom on the phone? I think it would do you good because I know you're unfamiliar with addiction. And I want you to know this has nothing to do with you or our relationship at all. And so I talked to her. She kind of explained that in a way that I was able to understand. And then Zeb said, would you go to a support group? Would you join an Al-Anon meeting? And I said, yeah, so I found one, went through Al-Anon. I got hooked into Nar-Anon. I found the paperwork in an Al-Anon meeting for Nar-Anon. And you're lucky nowadays with the Zoom meetings and the virtual availability of all that. So I was able to go to as many meetings as I wanted to or needed to at any point. And they're really all over the world. I had been to meetings with him, his own meetings, and that was also that was really cool. Before he relapsed, he said to me, because I guess he knew I was interested in just learning about him and what he had dealt with and what that was like to deal with. He said, why don't you come to a meeting with me? And I said, I'd love to. And I had no idea what to expect. But what was cool to me about that, when we walked out of the meeting, I said, I loved that. And he laughed and he's like, I knew you would. I said, I have never in my life been in any room with a group of people who are more honest, who are more confident in owning their mistakes and their shortcomings and just like raw put it out there, but like not in a shameful way, this is what I did and I'm sorry for it, but I'm not hiding it. And I just
You
thought
own your shit. You don't brag about it, but you own it, and it's fearlessly honest.
I wasn't used to that. I was used to being in groups where you hide your own flaws and your shortcomings and you hope no one notices. And you don't admit to anything like that, So it was really cool to me because I value genuineness more than anything else I value in a person.
Right.
And I don't think I could have found a more genuine group of people that night. And so, that's, I guess, explains why he was the way that he was. And so I really think anyone could benefit from a 12-step meeting of any kind, not only for working the steps, which I think would be helpful for people, but just having that awareness that it's actually more beneficial to talk through your problems, admit your struggles and your weaknesses and your shortcomings, and do it in a safe space, and figure a way out of them that way.
Yeah, like you said, that in that right there, the sharing with other people, getting your getting that black cloud off of your back, like just getting it out, sharing stories, sharing things that you've done. Like I share with people, like I joke about it, but it's probably true. I'll be making amends to people till till my end of days. But it really helps. Like, and the whole thing, like while you're talking to Zeb, I'm just sitting there listening. Like he sounds like an awesome guy. He owned it, he owned his shit. He just, fearlessly honest, and that's really hard to come by these days. And but like they know that getting that stuff out, man, it's getting it out of you, and that makes you feel better. Like, and it sounds like so simple and so stupid, but I don't know what it is. But if you go to a meetings or whatever you go into, and you come walking out of there, man, it feels like you just come walking out of Sunday morning church or something. You can hold
Yeah,
your head high. You got that stuff off you, and you feel proud instead of the cloud on your back and your head down and just miserable. So that
exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what I think. That's how I felt. Even leaving my own meetings, but and that's how that's what I try to channel now. And for me, that comes through my faith. It's that freedom to walk around with your head held high. And for myself, I know that, like, if I'm having God lead my life and I'm constantly like deferring to him, checking in, like overriding that natural tendency I have to, let me take the reins on this, like let me control this, or I want it to be this way. So let me see how I can take action to make it go that way. If I can catch myself in the middle of that and go like, no, your way, you lead, and I can just follow those callings, then it allows me to live like in such a free way that I'm doing what I think God is wanting me to do. So I don't care about all the rest. All the rest is just noise. People can like it, hate it, gravitate towards it, or wonder why I'm being so annoying with all my posts on social media, and it really just doesn't, that's just noise. It doesn't affect me. But I couldn't be that way if I didn't have that to say that, like, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think that's kind of the idea of the meetings too, and what it provided to him. But um yeah, just we lived such a big life in our short time together. And I think that was a big blessing. So while he was struggling with addiction, at different points throughout the relationship, there was so much that wasn't about that. So it wasn't like the focus of it, was just, it was part of what he was dealing with, part of what I was dealing with. We both had our own ways to find healthiness with those struggles. And otherwise, we were living a daily life like any other happy couple, planning what to do in the weekend, or grilling dinner and sitting on the balcony and having conversations, and going to work the next day, and taking trips. We like to travel together, coming to see his daughter and spending weekends with his family, going to church. Zeb was a very strong um, person in terms of his relationship with God and his faith also. So that was another thing that stood out to me when I met him is, I remember calling him one day, and I had been having a stressful day. I was struggling with some things, and this was prior to his relapse. And, I was just kind of complaining like you do with any other person in your life. And but his response was so different than what most people would give. And he just said, well, have you talked to God about it? And I remember just like, "Huh?" And
What'd you just say to me?
yeah. And I was like, no, I guess I haven't, and I said, do you do that? And he said, yeah, I do that all the time. I talk to God all day at any point in the day. And so I was intrigued. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, I just talk to him. I talk out loud to him like I do to a friend. And I had, been raised in church, but it was much more like a traditional and informal thing. So I had not ever had anyone say to me, just talk to God like out loud, like you do to a friend. You don't have to make it this perfect speech, And so I don't know, he just taught me how. And when we moved in together, we would, pray together every night as we were going to bed. We would say prayers before meals. We would pray together in the morning sometimes. But like I remember that first time praying out loud, he did it for a good little while for us. And then one night he just said, okay, your turn. And I froze and like, "Well, no, I can't do this. I can't do this." And he just was so good at reassuring me that, like, you got this. It's just you and me. There's no one else in this room. It's just you and me here. It doesn't matter how you sound, what you say, just talk to him. And like I was trembling. And for a person who has spoken in public so much, he really got me through that. And then it became like this take turns thing where tonight he did it, tomorrow night I did it. And it was just one of the coolest points of our relationship to be able to just connect in that way and keep God the focus like that. Um, and was probably not probably was, clutch in how we survived and navigated addiction because even though we had this great and strong relationship, I don't mean to paint like this pretty picture on top of the mess because it sucks in a lot of ways. A lot of the time, for a lot of reasons. And that that suckiness of it isn't meant to be just cast on him or the person struggling with the addiction either. Because suckiness came from my part too, and how I handled and mishandled things along the way. Um, so Nar for me was crucial. I got my own recovery and support group. And we were able to talk and I think people, at least Zeb did, people who are in recovery or struggling with addiction, if they were to think of Al-Anon or Nar groups, he thought that we would just sit and talk about our addicts the whole time, and like, oh, how tell me how to fix this, how you're going to deal with this situation. And I laughed and I'm like, actually, we don't really, if we're doing the program right, we don't talk about you guys specifically, like your stuff, because that's your stuff. We talk about ourselves and how to better ourselves as people and what our shortcomings are and who we need to make amends to, and how to keep the focus on ourselves and not get lost in the rat race of addiction. And 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 that keeps you in a healthy headspace, focusing on yourself. Make the decisions that you feel like are best for yourself, and and know that you can't make someone get clean. You can't make someone stay clean. And you also can't make someone relapse, make someone use, make someone, go off the deep end. And it's not to say that you can't affect, we can all affect each other. I mean, that's human interaction, right? So you can have positive and negative impact on the people that you love. But ultimately, you can't make someone do something, right or wrong, good or bad. And the same goes for him with me. And so learning all of that, but practicing it consistently so that it becomes part of your natural thought process. So that instead of a knee-jerk reaction, you take a pause and really, okay, what do I want to do here? What do I want to say here? Those things become a lifeline for you when you're navigating active addiction, for sure. So I was there to support him and I wanted him to know that. Um, if it was any attempt at recovery, like I wanted to help in any way that I could. And then the rest was just navigating. Addiction to me the reason I call it the devil, and I just think it is one of the absolute worst diseases, and really one of the worst things in the world, is that there's just such a fine line to be explored for success. And for someone in my shoes, that fine line, one side of it is enabling the person, and therefore not helping the situation and not helping yourself. Um, and then the other side of it is not being compassionate, and turning a blind eye, or turning your heart off to the disease of addiction and not recognizing it as such, and blaming the person that this is just this is your choice, you're choosing to do this, you just don't want to be better, how could you, and really piling on that shame that the person undoubtedly already feels. And so finding that balance is just so tricky. And it's crazy to me. I've not ever heard of anything else in life where you've got this 180-degree swing, that, two opposite reactions or responses to this stimulus, this addiction. And I could find myself anywhere on that pendulum at any given time. And I've been on all sides of it. I've been the person who enabled the situation to continue getting worse. And I've been the person who I felt was too harsh, and wasn't following my program, wasn't understanding in a time when he needed it. And like every degree of that you could think about on that pendulum, I've fallen on. And it was always the striving for that fine line, balance. And so I think I had a few things in my corner, that are real blessings. And one was from him. Like, he never put that on me at all. He was always very clear and vocal. This is not your responsibility. And I know that you love me. I know that you're doing the best you can. He didn't try to manipulate me into feeling guilty or bad about reacting this way or not reacting that way. He would say, I know. And in the moments of looking back, it was, I shouldn't have called for that, or I shouldn't have left there, and so even in active addiction, Zeb remained self-aware and called himself out on his BS, and took accountability for his mistakes and misactions, and really gave me a lot of grace in the way that I was handling his addiction. And that's something that I don't take for granted, because I don't know that people get that kind of support from those who are struggling. And that was huge for me, because mentally it was hard. I always felt like I could be doing this better. I'm not doing this well enough. And, that goes back to my own, you know, shortcoming, which is, thinking that I have this control over this situation. But, I don't know. I kind of, I'm just grateful to him for that. The stories that I hear a lot of people deal with, I didn't have to deal with. Zeb never stole anything from me. He didn't take anything. He didn't manipulate me for money. I didn't, have to suffer those types of consequences.
Mhm.
And, I appreciate it, because with addiction, none of that can really be, you don't know how the person will act. The person doesn't know when they're in active addiction, what they might do. And the fact that he was able to cling to like his love for me, and respecting the situation that I was in, and wanting to handle his active addiction in a way that, and it can't be handled, but in a way that had the least impact negatively on me is pretty remarkable. And so, but that said, I did everything, like I said, from one side to the other and everything in between. Sometimes that perfect balance, maybe. And I think that from my side of things, one thing that's important for me to say while we're talking is that if you're the loved one of someone struggling, like there's no right or wrong, in my opinion, way to get clean. There's no, just get clean if you can, and if that means medication assisted treatment, then sounds a lot better than active addiction and all the consequences that it brings with it. And, and I know that's not the position that some people take, and that's fine too. But as far as like on my side of things is concerned, it can kind of work the same way. So there's Nar-Anon, and there are other recovery programs, and, there are principles that they teach, but if I had advice to give someone in my shoes, it would be use those principles as guidelines, but always know that your goal should be, at the end of the day, when you put your head on your pillow, you can say, I'm doing the best I can. I'm making the best decisions I can. Now, I don't think that you can say that truthfully if you're not trying in your own recovery, trying to learn about it.
You need to be truthful about it, truthful with yourself and truthful with others.
Exactly. But if you are, taking the steps, everything that you can do to work your own recovery program, whatever that looks like. It doesn't even have to be a formal, program at all. But if you can put your head down on your pillow at night and be honest with yourself and say, whatever decisions you're making, you're doing the best you can at the time. That's what I always wanted for myself. I kind of knew that there's no perfect way to do this, and I'm human too. So I'm going to do things sometimes that enable, and sometimes it's just a byproduct of what is best for me, and it happens to enable. Sometimes I'm just not that strong. I'm not a perfect person, so I'm going to just enable, and then other times I'm going to lose my cool and I'm going to blow up. And again, I'm not a perfect person. I have emotions too, and as long as I always knew, okay, but I'm trying my best, then I didn't subscribe to the school of thought that's like, if this person does this, if any person in this situation does this, then you do that. And if any, addict in this situation does this or says this, then you do that. To me, that just isn't going to be beneficial to either party, because there is no cookie cutter situation. No two individuals at all are the same. And I never wanted to do something just because some program or some person who dealt with it before said I should, and that be the reason that I fall back on, because I needed to know this is a serious disease, and it has really serious consequences. And if anything ever did happen at all, no matter what that was, I did not want to have regrets of I shouldn't have done this or I should have done that, any more than I already have as a human being. And I struggle so hard with some of the shoulda, woulda, couldas after Zeb's passing. And the fact that I can fall back on, but you were always making the best decision that you could at the time, and you were trying as hard as you could to do the best you could with learning about addiction and working your own recovery. If I didn't have that peace of mind to fall back on, like, I don't know how I would navigate life nowadays. And so for me, I get a little nervous when I am in meetings and I hear someone say, well, if he does that, then you kick him out. You kick him out right there. You kick him out on the streets. That might be the truth. That might be a correct response for some people in some situations, and it probably worked for that person. But don't do that because that's what that person's saying. If that's not what you really feel in your educated about addiction mind and in your experience with your loved one, then don't do it. Because if the person does overdose that night, just an example, And that didn't happen to me. But if the person does overdose that night, I would not want to lay there and think I kicked him out and that's, and he overdosed. What if I hadn't kicked him out? Well, that could, if I'm going to feel that way, it better be because I made that decision thinking it was what was best for me and that person in our situation, and not because I thought I needed to follow a playbook that really just doesn't exist for every person.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny. Oh, it's not funny, but it's something that you said that, because I'm originally from upstate New York, and my cousin Lenny, he passed away a few years ago. And like what you said, he was, he liked to drink a lot, and freaking chases. We like to drink and we love our drugs, man. It's just, it runs in the family. But he was prone to violent outbursts, bipolar, runs in the family and all this stuff. And, he'd have medication, then he'd be drinking on top of that. He'd be doing some drugs, so I remember like when we'd go up and visit, we'd do some blow for, all day. And then, well, we got to go to sleep. So, we got to calm down a little bit, we're out of that. So now we got to switch over here and do a little bit of heroin. So just so we can come down. And I remember I came back down here, but I remember there was just a big family thing up there. And, I guess he got violent, got loud. And, his girlfriend at the time was like, you need to get out of here. You need to go. We can't have this. You got kids and dogs, just breaking shit. And, ended up like, you got to go or I'm calling the cops. So I don't know if the cops came, cops told him to go or what, but it was so long ago and I was using actively. So I don't remember a lot, but he ended up left and he went to a homeless shelter. And I don't know if he continued to use while in there, but he didn't wake up. He OD'd in a freaking homeless shelter. And everybody was like, oh, she kicked him out. She this and that, she this and that. And he's my cousin. And, it's a shitty circumstance that he got kicked out, but I've been there before. You're out of control, this and that. It's a shitty situation to see that happen. And I don't know of any other thing that could have happened. Any way that could have changed, but, to be kicked out and, to die in a homeless shelter, stoned, he just, he started acting right, before that, got a little sober for a little bit, laid off stuff. And he started going to get a certificate or, diploma, whatever, to be the drug and alcohol counselor there in Albany, New York. And then, next thing you know, he's just, he's ODing in a homeless shelter, and now he's been gone. So that's a couple of years. So it was funny that you say that, so what do you do? Do you stay there, like, with the violence and all that? You tell them to get out, it's just one more thing that has to do with alcohol and addiction. It's just such like that fine line. Everything is so tricky. And it's like, you're walking on eggshells, and it's just a bunch of miserable. It's just miserable.
Yeah, it really isn't. I just think that it gets too simplified by people who are in recovery, who are talking about, how to get in recovery, how to get clean, how to get sober. I think it's too simplified by them a lot of times, and the stuff that at least the content I come across. And also when they're talking to loved ones, and boundaries, the idea of boundaries, those are very healthy for all of us in most every situation in life. But that's the boundary that is best for you and your situation. And so I don't think that, that there can just be, if this happens, then this is what you should do. And that's you holding a boundary. That's actually you acting against your best interest, which is against the idea of boundaries. If you're not doing it for yourself, if you're doing it because that's just what you think you should do or what someone said you should do. Because yes, a lot of times you hear success stories, right? Where the person hits their rock bottom because, husband kicks wife out or wife kicks husband out, you got to go. And that was the wake up call that they needed, or whatever. Or there's just this always like negative consequence that the narrative that seems to suggest that this person made me face a really negative consequence. And that was my, wake up call. That's when I hit rock bottom and I turned it around. And I do think that happens. Those people aren't making it up. But I just think that, it's misleading in that, okay, so if I do this, then that will happen. And that's not true. And then the opposite side of this is, if I don't do this, then I'm causing this addiction to continue. And that's also not true. So it's just, I don't, it's hard to navigate. Like you said, it's just a
Mhm.
messy situation. And I just think, just do the work that you can to learn and respond and act the best that you can, and really stay true to yourself though in those situations.
Right. I mean, and that's all we can do is just our best. We take care of our side of the street. We make sure that we're right. We make sure that, we can't go around like worry about, well, this person, that person. I mean, that doesn't work. We've got to take care of, watch out for us, clean up, make sure our side of the street is clean, and then nobody has any room, to go say anything. And jumping back to what you're saying about Zeb, like always owning his shit. Like if you say something like him not saying, well, you did this, so now I've got to go out and use, those are two biggest things for me. When I was using, that was always, oh, well, she's home. The old lady's home bitching. Like I'm going out to get, drunk or hammered or whatever, man. I ain't got to deal with that, And it was always somebody else's fault, and always blaming somebody else. And the honesty part, I never, that never changed until about 14 months ago when I got sober. It was like, you know what, this isn't anybody's fault but mine. I got to own my shit. And when I did my story, I remember I sent it to George from North Beach, and he watched it. And he said the one thing that I noticed was that you owned your shit, and you took responsibility for it. And there's that for 32 years, I blamed everybody else, and I would, I'd lie. Oh man, no, that's not me. And I'm gonna tell you, the last 14 months of being honest and, truthful with myself, and just like getting to a place where I'm at now, just peace, relaxing. I let shit bother me, but I'm doing a lot better. But just
Yeah.
that spot where I'm at, with where I can be honest with myself, I do. I'll say, you know what? I did that. I screwed up. You know what? You own your shit and you move on,
Hmm.
and you be honest
Hmm.
with yourself, man. That whole denial, playing the blame game, all that, it's just one big headache. And if you just own your stuff, get it over with, boom, it's over, and
Yeah.
and you're done. The other way
Yep.
is just such a messy spider web. It's just a pain in the ass,
Right. Yeah. And ultimately, it leads nowhere, because even if you found someone that you could point a finger at, like, okay, so what, you're still in the situation you're in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, now what? So you blame somebody else and it's still the same. So what are you gonna
Yeah.
do?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um, so, uh, so yeah, I mean, Zeb had really, put a lot inside of his body that was harmful over the years. Being introduced to, um, pain pills at 19, and feeling like, okay, this is the answer. Nothing else really ever got his attention at all. But I think that only just speaks to how strongly the opioids did keep his attention, um, and then kind of advancing on through addiction like that. It harms your body over time. And so we had a kind of warning hospital visit in January of 2025. We were in the hospital for five days, just the two of us. And um, it, things had gotten at, like, right before he got put into the hospital, then is when things had gotten really sad, in terms of um, just almost like watching a helpless child, um, that just really couldn't, and so he had every reason while in the hospital, everything that someone, you would hope someone could say to you to wake you up, the doctors in the hospital and that stay said. And so we had some hard conversations. They had hard conversations with us. And Zeb had always been interested in getting on the Vivitrol shot. And so he had been able to do that in December of 24. And that had been a process to finally get, approved and get in the right situation to be able to get the shot and all that stuff. So actually December and first part of January was great, and things seemed to be good in terms of that. But he did say that, he didn't think that he could tell that shot was wearing off, like the fourth week of that month. And he made a comment about that. And so the struggle kind of churned back up in a big way. Like the devil of addiction really came back on strong. And that's where I think that people don't listen to, the ones who are struggling with addiction enough. And that's just unfortunate, because addiction is a disease that affects the brain. The brain just happens to be the organ in the body that affects our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. And so those things are going to get judged because your chemicals in your brain are off, your thoughts are off. Those are then determining what your actions are. Not the same way that a person suffering from heart disease and they've got this disease affecting their heart, that's not going to affect their thoughts and their actions. So it's just really unfortunate that a side effect of active addiction is lying, dishonesty, hiding, manipulation, everything that the disease can do to protect itself. And so then, that causes, I think, people to just never think that they can trust someone struggling with drug addiction. Everything they say must be intended to manipulate, must be being dishonest to try to, spin an angle to get drugs again or whatever. And it's sad because a lot of times I think people they know themselves. They're being honest about what they're feeling when they're in recovery centers. They're being honest with this is not effective enough for me. This is not helping me, or I need something different. I need a longer stay. I don't feel ready to leave yet. And those things are just brushed off so often as, nope, this is how it's done, or this, or it will for that, or if you don't do it this way, you just must not want it bad enough. If I hear the phrase, you just must not want it bad enough again, it'll be, a million times too many.
Right.
Because my experience and his experience were different. I have never witnessed day in and day out someone want recovery, want sobriety, and take steps working for it so many times in so many ways, put so many points of friction in their own path, reaching out to a drug dealer and saying, I think that my phone's being, watched by the police because I'm on probation. So, don't communicate with me anymore. If you get a text or a phone call, don't answer it. Like, those are things that he's, in active addiction, but still wanting to get sober so bad. He's like, what all can I put in my path that might just be like that catalyst to get me over the hurdle? And so when people just say, well, he or she just must not have wanted it bad enough, I really want to slap them in the face, and it just, to me, it speaks to judgment on another level, which is, if I've done something and this is how I did it, then you should be able to do that way too. And if you can't do it that way, then you're not doing it right, and you must not want it enough. Well, that doesn't apply to any situation that we can think of in life,
Right.
outside of recovery. And so sometimes I feel like the judgment comes from within too. And I don't think that most judgment that we see is ill-intended. Like I said earlier, I think it just comes from a place of ignorance, really. And
Right. And
so
a
that's what,
lot of that may be to the judgmental part, but then also, the ignorance part. Not saying they're ignorant, but they are ignorant of, they haven't been through addiction, or they don't know somebody that's gone through addiction. So they're ignorant of how it is inside that person's mind. Some people are like, oh, well, that guy does this. Oh, I'd never do that. And, that's like, you never know what somebody's going through, and you don't know what's in their head. So, for you to judge somebody else, and, that just show, because I used to do it all the time. Even when I was in active addiction, I'm like, oh man, well, this guy, that and that and that. And it's just like, and now I'm just sitting there like, I'm the biggest piece of shit that was out there, man. I had no right to judge anybody. I'm like, wow. And, it's just, it's, the ignorance, it's just that, and the judgment, it's overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, I just know that with Zeb, like a few things that he said, a lot that he said sticks out in my head and in my heart, but a few things I think are worth passing on to other people. And, one time I asked him, what does it feel like? Because I knew anyone who's suffered as many negative consequences as he has from an addiction is not he's just choosing to be that way, just choosing to use drugs. No one would choose that life,
Right.
especially having all these other alternative options. So there had to be more to it than that. That didn't add up. So I said, what is it like when you are craving, when you're in the middle of like severe craving? And he said it would be like if someone cut off your leg and they put it in the corner of our room right here. And they said, you can't have your leg back, but you have to stare at it. And you knew that you could just go over there and put that leg back on and everything would feel normal again. But the person was just preventing you from doing that. Like, I feel like in those moments, I need this the way that I truly need air to breathe or need a leg attached to my body. And that just woke me up from my side of things then it becomes just, I can't imagine what that would be like to deal with. I've never dealt with anything that's that severe. And so who am I to judge, in those moments what that must be like? And another thing was just he was so grateful that I did learn all I could about addiction. And he said, no one's ever done that. No one's ever taken the time to try to understand all of it, read the science about it, and talk to other people who've dealt with it. You really, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to read, and a lot to kind of toss around in your own brain. That if you love someone who's struggling with addiction, like, you don't know how much it might mean to them that you're taking that interest. If I had a disease and my loved one just wouldn't even learn anything about it, that feels cold. And so if you keep running it through this is affecting chemicals in the brain that in a severe way, things that we haven't even learned yet through study. But if that's true, then like, let me open my eyes and ears and attention to all of this and see what I think about it, and see how it might help me react and respond differently to my loved one. And then, the last thing that really sticks out is the week that Zeb passed away. He said, and he cried a lot. He did. He felt extreme shame for losing his daughter, and he would cry out about that a lot, about the pain that he caused his family and me along the way. And, just a lot of stuff that breeds that shame and addiction. But, as far as the just not wanting it enough, your loved one just not wanting it enough, he was crying, and he said, if I could make a list of everybody who wants me to get clean, I promise you I'd be at the top of that list. And that's how he lived. Like, that's how his actions, that's what they showed. And I know that to be true. And I just find it sad that people are struggling and they feel like there's a stigma and a shame attached to it that make people that love them not believe that they want to be different.
Right. I mean, that was me for years. When I came back to Savannah in 2018, I mean, I was baked. I was done. Like I told on my story, I was ready. I'd saved up some money. I was going to give my son the money, the key to my storage with all my speakers and my valued electronics and all my gold bullion. And I had a guy down here that was gonna hook me up with a hot shot. I was gonna put my headphones on and put myself in a dumpster and just go because I had enough of it and I was tired of it and I was done. And so I ended up going until another 8 years, 9 years down here. Tried a couple suicides a couple times. It didn't work, and it was just, it's amazing. Somebody's like, "Well, just quit doing it. Just knock it off like that." And I tell myself every day, it's like, "Man, I ain't doing this again." And as soon as you get off work, that's the first thing in your head, and that's the first thing that you're doing. I don't give a shit what anybody says. You're going to get that, and it's no matter all day. You'd say, "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it." And it's just it's amazing how your mind works and just how that shit it makes you feel. If you've got pain or hurt or, just, whatever, it's like you're trying to use this to numb it is what I was doing, try to forget it. But eventually you're using so much, you're not numbing anything. You're just, you're doing more damage to yourself. And in the end, it's just crazy how that, in your mind works and you just have to have it. And I
Right.
couldn't quit. I mean, I tried. I tried before, I went like 11 and a half months. And then all of a sudden it was just like my attitude, something came on me and it was like this black cloud. I just got this attitude. Now I just had the shittiest attitude or whatever. And I just got out of I was doing a church-based program at the time. I just got out of a meeting at like 5. I just walked out the door and somebody just said something and I was aggravated. I just said, "Man, fuck this." I went and got cigarettes and started drinking again. And I let down the thing. So I just blew like 11 and a half months. Now you can't
Right.
say I wanted to do that. It's because
Right.
man, as soon as I took that first sip, I smoked that cigarette. I just remember saying, "You fucking idiot. You just blew all that
Mhm.
time." And then that right there, that the aggravation with myself, I think it was more,
Yes.
disappointed in myself, aggravated with myself. Now I'm down here and it was just full steam ahead again. So I think it has a lot to do with, how you feel about yourself. And, sometimes you kick your own ass because it's like, man, I want to stop. I want to stop, but I can't, so that, you need
Mhm.
some help. You got to go to some professionals, seek some help and sometimes it's
Mhm.
okay to ask for a helping hand sometimes, and that's one
Yeah.
thing that I never would. If I go somewhere, people give me phone numbers to call, I'd never reach out just because my pride and my hard head, I just wouldn't do it. But I had to get to the point where I was done and I knew I was done. And I'm like, all right, let me go ahead and reach out here and get some help and, let other people help me, you know,
Yeah.
and that
Yep.
that's
Exactly. And if you quote unquote fail, try again. That was always my thing with him is like as long as you're always trying, then it's acquired knowledge along the way. It's not a failure. Like you're learning about it more, you're learning yourself more. So just keep trying.
definitely. That's the best advice I've heard all day. It's, I mean, it's the truth. It's God's honest truth.
So yeah, I guess to kind of just wrap up, Zeb passed away. I do think that there's some research coming out now that they're seeing like something like never before in terms of the tolerance that individuals have developed to fentanyl, which we know is laced into a lot of the drugs now. And
Yep.
um, because of those tolerance levels kind of being at all-time highs, a lot of the medications that are given out to try to treat addiction and help with recovery are no longer for some people.
Right.
Um, they're not strong enough. It used to be sort of, and so I also kind of want people to look into that, do your research about that too, because I think soon we'll start seeing that there really can't be this one dose fits all um, cure for someone in addiction. You know, you've got varying levels, varying stages of this addiction that people struggle with. And so the idea that you can give everyone the same dose of a shot every month, and that's going to, you know, affect them all equally, give everyone the same help, just isn't true. You know, so I think recognizing that, hopefully, if the healthcare industry kind of opens their eyes to that, we can do better with that, because a lot of the failure comes in with, you know, well, I tried this and this worked for my friend, but it didn't work for me, so I'm a failure, you know. And then you've got the room saying, well, you must just not want it bad enough. And so it's just it's considering all of this, and just really, I think, open your minds, open your eyes, do your own research, treat people kindly, do the best you can, and then just realize that this is a serious disease. This is a serious addiction. And just because one person finds success or recovery one way, doesn't mean that another person's not trying hard enough or not wanting it bad enough because that's not working for them.
Yep. So different strokes for different folks. And it's, you know, what works for me didn't work for other people, and what worked for other people didn't work for me. I mean, everybody is different. Everybody has their own plan, you know, and that's just how it is.
Yeah. 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 I mean, fortunately with the Narcan, that does seem to be getting spread around a bit more than a lot of other information. And, you know, I'm all for that, you know, because it's really like extend these lives with people struggling with addiction while we can do this research and try to get better, and give that 100th chance a time to maybe be the one that is the one that is successful, you know. So it's really buying yourself time in the best ways that you can. But, you know, to Zeb's situation, just also remembering that, you know, our bodies are taking a serious impact with these drugs, with these chemicals that are being put into them. And, you know, none of us are promised tomorrow, but our organs they can only function for so long doing so much. And so.
Yeah, we weren't made to go cramming all these drugs and stuff into us. It's just, you know, we're not built for that. And I know I myself, I'm grateful. I was out there for 32 years, and I think I tried everything that there was to try multiple times. I just couldn't get enough. I had to do it to the extreme. And I mean, and I probably say it every episode, and I'll keep saying it. I thank God, because I know people that were out there for, you know, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you know, whatever, 10 years, that they didn't make it. And for some reason, whatever, maybe this podcast is the reason. I don't know God's will or why he brought me through it. But if it wasn't for God's will, his mercy and his grace on me and my mother and her prayer warriors friends, I wouldn't be here today. And I mean, 32 years, it's just, you know, it's a miracle. And it's, you know, the only thing I think of is, you know, thank God. I mean, because I don't know who else did it for me. I couldn't do it for myself. So,
well, it's good. See, and what you just said, I think, is so important, because I think the mindset becomes scary sometimes when someone has lived with the addiction so long and done such serious amounts of it through the years, because there's this like invincible, it can't kill me, because if it could, it already would have so long ago, you know. And then that discounts all the near misses, but also it discounts the fact that, yes, you probably came close to death a lot of times, and for some reason, whatever reason, you haven't died yet, but you don't realize that impact to your organs is getting chipped away at every time, you know, whether you're seeing that or not. So like that seems to get overlooked or ignored. And so, you know, even more so with people who've used for so many years, it's like, it's the thought process shouldn't be, it can't kill me or it already would, you know, because your organs are actually the ones who've been damaged the most. And it's scary.
It is. I mean, I didn't care. I mean, like in my story, I said I didn't care if I lived or died from like the ages of 8 years old. I was like, I didn't give a shit about life. The physical abuse, just everything. I didn't care, and I knew. I was like, I don't even care. But 14 months ago, when I was laying there on the floor with the toilet and puking blood, shitting blood, my stomach. I mean, I didn't eat. Didn't eat anything. If I did, something maybe once a day, just to get on the stomach. I mean, no food, feeding it up with liquor, drugs, pills. I mean, it took a toll. I mean, I can feel it now. I mean, I'm still left with, things that I did to my body that I'll always deal with, but I'm here and, I can deal with that. So as long as I'm here, I'm going to keep pushing these podcast episodes, trying to help people.
I think you should. I mean, I think this is your purpose, and Zeb he cried out to God too and asked for help. And I've had to do a lot of soul searching and Bible reading and wrestling with God a lot, over the last year and a half to come to a place where I say, God was merciful to Zeb. He did actually answer his prayer. He did save him from addiction. And for Zeb, that meant, taking him to heaven and removing that disease in the ultimate way. And now I can be the voice, like you are. And maybe that's my purpose. And so just like you, as many people as I can just ask to listen, if it's just that one conversation, that might be the one conversation that is some kind of small catalyst to a big change later. And that's what I'm all about. So I think what you're doing is amazing.
Well, and likewise with the Into Light project and just everything you're doing. Likewise, same to you. Well, I say we just keep doing what we're doing, and we'll hope for the best, and hopefully we can reach somebody out there in the darkness of addiction and draw them into the light. That's the main goal.
That's the thing. Yeah, nobody in life at all should be defined by their darkest moment. I wouldn't want to be defined by my darkest moment. And so bring it into light.
Right on. Well, I believe we will wrap it up. Is there anything else you would like to say, or to anybody, anything? I
think I've covered pretty much everything I did, want to get out there. So I just appreciate again the platform that you've given me and you're giving others, and just reach out. Anyone who sees this and wants to reach out to me directly, definitely don't hesitate. Happy to keep anything confidential and happy to share anything that I can.
Right on. And if you will, like I said, I'll air this. This will be aired probably in a couple of weeks. If you will send me via Messenger or whatever, any links to you, the Into Light project, anything that you would like to be posted down underneath on YouTube, okay, Spotify, or Apple Podcast, I'll put that in with my writing or whatever, and that way we can have any links that you need, information that you'd like anybody to see. They can be posted out there, and they can click on them too.
Awesome.
So yeah,
thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Kristi. I once again, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking your time to come in here and tell what Into the Light project is about and Zeb's story. Thank you for telling his story for him. I appreciate it, and I know there's when everybody hears it, I know they'll appreciate it too. So, all right, well, that's a wrap, and with that, we will end the episode. And if anybody would like to be a guest, I'll have some links, and stay sober and be well. Until next time.
Reach out, get the help you need. Ain't no shame in self-love, baby.